Now, we talk more on voter behavior and its significance. I'm joined in studio by independent elections analyst Dawie Scholtz, and also joining us via Skype. Good morning, Dawie. Joining us via Skype is political analyst Thapelo Tselapedi. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this morning. Dawie, let me start with you. You've created a model with specific expectations. Just give me your high-level prediction for the May the 8th election first.
So prediction is a big word. I think at this stage there's an increasing level of clarity about the ballpark that we are expected to operate within, based on the polling that we've seen, based on a lot of the by-elections that we've seen in the recent past, and a little bit of what's happening in the campaign trail. And it's starting to look like a ballpark outcome of the ANC somewhere in the high to mid-50s. The expected exact number in my model is 58%, but I think that's less important than the kind of range, which suggests the ANC most likely holding on nationally, but with a reduced majority. But we can have a discussion about the various kind of variables that are driving that as well.
Okay, I want to talk about the various drivers of that with Thapelo. Thapelo, how much is race and also just the past? How much is that a driver when people go out to the polls?
Look, I think a number of analysts have said this before. I don't think race is a primary driver. I certainly think the association between the ANC and the grant system is quite important. I certainly think that the issues around service delivery are quite important. If you look among the black voters in general, you would see that they're quite diverse in terms of their voting patterns as well. Voting for as diverse parties for your EFF, for your ANC, for your DA, and so on and so forth. So I think within the black voting bloc, they're quite diverse. I wouldn't therefore peg the issue on a racial parameter. So I think other variables are far more important, particularly the issue around the association between the ANC government or ANC and the grants that we see being dispersed, obviously through SARS and all of that. But then the others, of course, around basic service delivery. Housing is quite important. Water and electricity is going to become a political issue, I think.
Okay, now Dawie, you state that in the last 3 elections, black voters have started moving away from the ANC. Tell us why do you think they've started moving away from the ANC?
I think that's a really complex question. The first thing I'll just say is let's just establish to what extent they have. So if you look at a province like Gauteng, for example, and you do the demographic analysis for the full province, and the full province's black electorate, and you look at it from, say, the 2011 election onwards. In 2011, the ANC won about 87% of the black vote in Gauteng. In 2014, it was down to 78%. In 2016, it was down to 69%. So it went from 87 in 2011 to 69 in 2016, and that's why they lost Joburg and Tshwane, right? Because there was a large portion of the black electorate that moved away. And I think there's a long discussion to be had about why. I think Jacob Zuma was very unpopular in Gauteng and in other parts of the country as well, including amongst the black electorate, and that would have had an impact. I think there's also something that happens in democracies, and this is a very well-studied phenomenon, which is when a party has been in government for a long time, there is a natural change gravity that starts to form within an electorate. And we, in fact, see this in political brands, but also in normal brands. Brands have to renew themselves to remain relevant, and I think the ANC is facing that challenge, reaching 20 years, reaching 25 years, reaching 30 years at some point in the future. There is a natural change gravity that emerges, and the party will have to deal with that, because people do want change, and I think people want economic progress, more access to the economy and so on, and there are questions emerging as to whether the ANC, at least in some portion of the electorate, whether the ANC is still the best party to do that.
Now, Thapelo, still with the metros as well, I mean, that shift, it seems that shift is the shift that saw the ANC losing quite significant metros. You can't, we can talk about PE and so forth. There must be a reason that's actually happening within that black electorate that we're talking about. And also the ANC coming out speaking about their own internal survey, saying that they feel there'll be more white voters will vote for the ANC because of President Cyril Ramaphosa. Talk to me about those 2 issues and why you think that will be so.
Look, to talk about the first one, certainly I think there are a lot more variables that may arise from there. I think one, Johannesburg and Gauteng has the largest black middle class in the country, and the black middle class are obviously quite concerned about a whole host of bigger narrative issues around corruption. For them, there's obviously an immediate understanding between how corruption is connected to the issues around ESCOM, how corruption is connected to the issues around the strength of the currency, whereas those things are not maybe perhaps more immediately understood by ordinary citizens. And I think those are the issues that may drive perhaps a lot of people who may have been ANC traditional voters, but would prefer to sit and not go to the voting booth. And I think that's what happened. A lot of the difficulty for the ANC at those local government elections in Johannesburg and Tshwane were preferred, or rather, prefer to just sit at home and not go vote. I think that's the first variable. The second element, around the white voters for President Cyril Ramaphosa, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite convinced of that. And it's not the first time I've heard it. Yes, the ANC has spoken about it. But I do agree with the statistics being given out that I think there will be a decreased majority for the ANC, that I'm also looking at the late 50s for the ANC. And I don't think that would be the white vote would be a huge driver for the ANC in terms of its electoral fortunes. I do think that basically the black electorate will still be an electoral importance for the ANC. So I think they need to still focus on that. If you look at the voting pattern still of a number of white people, they still majority vote for the minority or the main opposition party as well. So in terms of that vote block for the ANC, I don't think it would make such a huge impact, at least in terms of how they're talking about it. So I don't think we should make anything of it for now.
Now, Thapelo, you're talking about the late 50s. What if we get to a point where it's not the late 50s and it's the lower 50s? What do you think? Would we end up with a coalition government in South Africa? Do you think that would actually work as well?
Look, if I'm going to put my head on the block here, I don't think that's going to happen at the national level. And I don't think that at the national level we're going to see mid-50s or even lower 50s. I think we're still going to see, if not late 50s, then perhaps early 60s. But I don't think, perhaps if you may look at provinces like Gauteng, that may be a coalition, but I don't think for the moment you're going to have a coalition at the national government.
Okay. Dawie, back to the numbers as well. The model that you put together, where do you see your EFFs, your ACDPs, the smaller parties?
So I think the smaller parties have systematically gotten squeezed in the last couple of elections to a smaller and smaller proportion of the electorate, with the exception of the EFF. So I think the EFF is doing better in the last 9 months, 12 months in by-elections. In all the polling we've seen, they seem to be doing better. We know that they got about 6.6% of the vote last time. I think it's a very rational expectation that they will have more. The question is, of course, just exactly how much more.
Yep.
And it seems, from the by-election, the pollings, it seems to be something like 10%, maybe 11% or 12% on a good day. But the exact number is not exactly clear.
Yep.
But there's some very interesting trends in places like KZN, I think, Southern KZN, eThekwini, PMB. They seem to be doing a little bit better. And then they seem to be doing really well in their traditional stronghold, so Gauteng, Northwest, the Free State to some extent. But I think a really big variable for them will be Limpopo this year. We know Cyril Ramaphosa is from Limpopo. We know that traditionally the EFF has done very, very well in Limpopo. And there's a big question about the extent to which they'll be able to hold that vote or grow it, given that Cyril Ramaphosa is from Limpopo.
Okay. Thapelo, last question for you.
Sure.
The EFF, 6.6% they garnered the last time around. Will they grow that? And what type of voter does the EFF attract?
Look, I think the EFF is going to grow. It may be one of the, in terms of the, smaller parties that would have the biggest growth. But those are just my thoughts on that. Look, I think the EFF has cut a number of supporters and voters. I think you have your black middle class who are quite frustrated with the level of transformation in your corporate sector, who are quite frustrated with the level of intervention in the private sector by the ANC government. Then you have ordinary people who are unemployed or unemployed graduates, your fees must fall activists. So I think they have a quite a good crop of people. And again, if you look at the sort of constituencies that were visiting during the elections, some of them are quite old people in Soweto that were visiting. Some of them were young people and people in the different sectors. So that has been quite amazing to see from the EFF, that people who are from 8 years old to people who are 20 years old that are members and supporters of the EFF. So to that extent, they're able to pull a huge cohort of people onto that campaign and to that manifesto, and to believing that the objectives are quite right for the ANC. So certainly, remember, part of the EFF is to capitalize on the weaknesses of the ANC, and they're doing that quite properly.
All right, interesting, very interesting, guys. Thank you so much for shedding some light on what could happen come May the 8th, and you know, what type of voter we're facing for these different political parties. That was independent elections analyst Dawie Scholtz in studio with me, and political analyst Thapelo Tselapedi was joining me via Skype.